what reform needs to do is a couple of things. First of all, they need to cultivate courage as well as understand the problem, because it's all well and good taking defectors from previous parties to give you an understanding of how the inner working of state actually functions. But if they were members of the failed political parties of the past, number one, you're going to look like a refugee camp or a retirement home for Tory politicians to the public who don't want Tory politicians. And two, if they were leading the previous government, then they were responsible for all of the problems, and so they weren't courageous enough to enact the solutions they're now proposing to you. You need actually quite a lot of fresh faces with nothing to lose, quite a lot of these sort of young men that have staffed the Trump administration, frankly, the people I've spoken to in the likes of the State Department who are really getting things done, who go in with the mentality of, you can just do things, in order to push through this legislative agenda without any qualms. You need people with courage and conviction. Secondly, you do need a lot of CVs on file for that to happen. You're going to have to replace thousands of civil service. And one thing the Trump administration did, I know that Project 2025 was infamous, but one of the quieter things that was done was consulting places like the Claremont Institute and American Moment, different think tanks that gave young people placements and mentorship schemes in the Senate, in Congress, in various NGOs for a semester. And they kept those young people's CVs on file so that they knew they had politically aligned, competent, uncompromised people they could hire into the administration. And that's why things are basically running like clockwork. The third reason they're running so well is because Stephen Miller and the American First Policy Institute and various other policy bodies, like American Moment, came up with a suite of legal and policy reforms that they're now enacting as a sniper shot agenda. This is why Donald Trump had hundreds of executive orders to sign on day one, and it's why the core frustration is actually how slow and sclerotic Congress has been to cement Trump's agenda into legislation, despite them having a slim majority in the House and the Senate. What reform needs to do is realize that if you regain parliamentary sovereignty by repealing the various laws that act like a Japanese knotweed strangling our national sovereignty, that you can basically just do anything. You're not like the separation of powers American system that ties everything up in judicial review in the Supreme Court, or holds it hostage to various conflicting moneyed interests in the Senate and Congress. Instead, if you are a party of government, you can just, if it's in the manifesto, you can just pass bills. The only way they can be thwarted is by two reasons. Number one, the House of Lords. They're meant to act as a stopgap on legislation. The House of Lords can only block things that are proposed that aren't in the manifesto, that aren't voted on by the public to be passed. And the problem that Reform has is it has no Lords. Despite being the popular party in the polls at the moment, they have only 5 MPs in the House of Commons, and they have no Lords that they're currently appointing. And so unless they put massive House of Lords reform in their manifesto, which would then allow them to reform the House of Lords before the Lords can block any bills, they're going to have a hard time getting anything that they want to do after being elected that they didn't promise before through the House of Lords, because Labour and Conservative Lords will just block it out of spite. And the other thing they need to do is repeal all of the laws that stop them from hiring and firing civil servants. At the moment, the cabinet secretary is the most powerful person in Britain. He basically tells what elected ministers should do. Great example of this is David Goodhart when he was having dinner with the cabinet secretary for Tony Blair and Gordon Brown at Oxford in 2010, a man named Gus O'Donnell, which they nicknamed God, obviously because of his initials, but because he was so powerful. He told him he was writing a book on the anywheres and somewheres divide, the people who are rooted in their country versus the transitory international business class who have global liberal values in mind. And Gus O'Donnell said, when I was at the Treasury, I lobbied for the most generous open borders immigration policy possible because I believed my commitment was to global welfare. And so this permanent civil servant that ministers can't fire, but he can fire ministers, is enacting open borders in an unelected bureaucracy against the wishes of the electorate. So what they need to do is they need to repeal the Constitutional Reform Act and get rid of the Supreme Court. They need to repeal the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act to get rid of civil service neutrality and the Civil Service Code being into law. They need to repeal the Human Rights Act to get rid of the European Convention on Human Rights. And they also need to leave or substantially reform the UN's 1951 Refugee Convention. They need to get rid of the Equality Act, which means that these civil servants will definitely sue for discrimination on the grounds of you breaking up their various identity interest groups within the civil service, like the LGBT network or the Home Office Islamic network, which, by the way, have had activists that have called Israel the Great Satan and actually pointed and laughed at ISIS recruitment videos and seminars, recognizing school friends as being active jihadists while calling counter-terror measures racist. These people shouldn't be working in our civil service. They need to get rid of all of these measures that block them enacting their legislative agenda, and they need to do it as soon as they come into government, because if you leave it, you will allow the civil service to become an organized minority that can cause institutional non-compliance, either by leaking to the press or just refusing to enact your agenda or tweaking bills and slipping it past inexperienced reform ministers who have the best of intentions but don't have the experience, as you've said. So you need courage, you need conviction, you need competence, and you need a pre-drafted legislative agenda to hit the ground with on day one. So you don't become Trump term 1, you become much closer than Trump term 2.